privacy. Dalawa kurso. Kami class. Tayo kita kami.
And good afternoon, everyone. I am Joe Garcia. I am the Senior VP of Development here at Chemical, and MMFM is an initiative of Chemical, along with the Animation Incentive Initiative, another initiative of an initiative of Chemical. And I'm thrilled that all of you guys are here. I know the weather's terrible. Maybe people are getting, slowed down getting back to computer. So let's give everybody a couple of minutes. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let me know if you guys are here interested because of the animation, because of gaming, just interest in general, that kind of stuff. Put all that in the chat, and we'll get started. And now, for some reason, it's asking me to if I'm speaking Arabic, which I am not. I checked. Okay, this is being recorded so that if you have to go in and out, if you have to take a call, whatever, we will post this video on our YouTube channel. And you'll be able to see all this that we're doing. At the end, you will see our email, and you can email if you want a copy of the PDF that we're going to be using as a presentation for today. The subject for today is story structure, and it's the foundation of everything. This is Genesis, square one. Getting your story structure correct allows you to develop a compelling story, which is related but not exactly the same thing. And if you have a compelling story and you have the right story structure, then you can create, characters that can sort of function in that world. For you who are not aware, I have a background in screenwriting. I have written a couple of feature films, a few TV pilots. In the process of, knock on wood, getting one of those sold, a TV pilot that is. I've written for animation, I've written for television, I've written for feature films. And more important than that is the number of mentors I have gathered over the years. If you were to put all their Emmys and Oscars put together, you couldn't have a shelf strong enough to hold all that. So, let me start getting all my stuff ready because we're going to be. I'm going to do. By the way, what I'm not good at is all this techie stuff, sharing screen. So it might take me a minute to get it together. So don't panic if that happens. Today we're going to cover, because I'm assuming most of you are coming from the animation space, I figure that the best way to discuss story structure is to go with one of the more classic examples of story structure in an animated feature. So let's give everybody a couple of minutes to come in and get a drink, make yourself comfortable. Feel free to take notes. I ask that you hold off all your questions to the end, and and once we do that, we can address all your questions. This should run about an hour. There will be another session. You will get another link for another registry. It's all free for next week. We're going to do this next week and the week after that. So let's everybody literally just one more minute as I get into screen sharing mode. I promise not to be interesting until then. I think I know what I'm doing. So it's 2:04. It's 2:05. Okay, let's get started because we do have a lot to cover. Okay, let's share the screen. Okay. This is, for some reason, this. When I try to share the screen, the Zoom menu covers the menu of what I need to be doing. So let me just hold on for a second. Okay. Okay. I'm going to assume if you have troubles seeing the screen, uh, the screen from my PowerPoint, let me know in the chat. but I'm assuming everybody can see it correctly. We are MMFM, the Miami Media and Film Market. We're an initiative of Camacol, as you can see, which is a Latin Chamber of Commerce of the United States. And we could not do this without our partners um, who help us with, by the way, we're a nonprofit, we're a 501c6. We don't make any money. Nobody's here to make a giant profit. We're here to help you. That's our mission. And we could not do this, especially with our partners at Career Source, South Florida. They are terrific in helping people, especially in kind of out of the box industries, make careers, get really meaningful, employment. And you're going to be hearing a lot more about us and them in the next few months because we have a couple more exciting things coming your way. Plus the City of Miami District 1, the Miami-Dade Public Library System. They're also huge partners. Now our newest partner is Miami-Dade County Cultural Affairs Office. So what is story structure? Story structure is the order in which elements of a narrative story are presented to the reader. And by the way, right now we're thinking reader because before you can have a viewer, you need to have a reader who reads the script and says, yes, let's make this into a movie, let's make this into a TV show. So you kind of have to write in such a way that the person who's going to read it can visualize what this is going to look like on the screen. And two things. This is not as complicated as it seems, but it's also not as easy as it seems. It's one of those things that you can do, quote unquote, correctly, meaning in the correct format, all that kind of stuff. But to do it well is really difficult. So, anyway, so the story structure is composed of two parts, which is the actual story and the elements that go with it, which are the characters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why is story structure important? Because good story structure, and there is bad story structure, establishes a pattern of narrative problem solving. You're going to be going from, a situation that a character has to a character solving that situation, which causes another problem or another set of circumstances. Also, good story structure helps you put your events in order in your story because the audience has, and this is very much a function of pretty much all Western civilization storytelling, they have a set of expectations going back, from the earliest of Greek mythologies. These all have a very specific beginning, middle, and that kind of thing. And when your story structure isn't working, it's because your story structure isn't right, and you need to. And it's if you know what to look for and you practice at it, you can find out what's going on and fix it. Okay. Why story structure? Okay, we covered why it's important. In a second, we're getting frozen here. Okay, we're unfrozen. All right. There are different frameworks for good story structure. And depending on whose books you read, they're going to tell you this is the right or not the right way. You will pick the one that's good for you. But the most basic one is the classic 3-story structure. And the elements, these little tabs here, different people give them different names. I'm going to tell you the ones that I think are correct. But every story, and sometimes you want to break it up differently, or you want to call it different. You want to call the different breaks different things, but they're all 3-act structure. Yeah, somebody, broadcast television has, 5. It's all 3. We're going to say that it's 5 and sort of artificially divide it into 5. That's fine. But for the purposes of what you're going to be writing, it's 3 acts. And incidentally, this is important even if you're not going to be a writer. It's important if you are going to be a director, if you're going to be a lead animator, if you're developing, a new game, because you need to know what good writing is, even if you're not the one doing it. You need to be able to recognize what works and what doesn't work and how to fix it. Sometimes, very often, the writer has been working on something for so long that they become blind to the mistakes they're making. And every single last solitary writer you have ever read, ever heard of, who's made every TV show and film you've ever seen, they all needed somebody to say, "Ooh, maybe that part where the guy yells at yeah, that maybe if you change this or that." Every single last one of them has had that input. It's called notes, for those who are not aware. They've all needed to get notes on that kind of thing. Here is another framework. Again, you see things like the hook, the inciting incident, the first plot point, all that stuff. Don't get excited. There's another one. It's a very famous one, the hero's journey. You see how those tabs, he gives them different names. And the call to adventure, the refusal of the call, meeting the mentor. This is something very recognizable if you're familiar with Star Wars or Harry Potter or any of those where, oh, you're called to be this, but I don't want to be that. Then you meet the mentor, the Gandalf, the Obi-Wans, etc. You sort of test yourself in that world, etc. Let's not get hung up on those. I'm going to give you the simplest one. And then if you want to get complicated on your own, by all means, be my guest. So things to consider in a story. By the way, don't get hung up on these names. The hook, inciting incident. Don't, it's good to know. It's not imperative that you have these memorized. If you're ever in a writer's room where you're working on a TV show or a feature, nobody's going to say, what is our first pinch point? That'll never happen. It's important for you to know so you can see where you are map in terms of the map of the story. It's not important for you to know in terms of being conversational with other writers or with it would be a cynical thing to say, learn this and forget it, but learn it, sort of have it in your back pocket so that you know what you need to do when a situation comes up.
No, pero no para la
So the
familia
hook is
mía,
the first
¿no?
thing that makes you go, wait a second. In the case of Harry Potter, for example, when a very young Harry Potter is getting angry and he makes things happen like the glass at the serpent area of the zoo disappears so his cousin Dudley falls in, that's the kind of thing that is the hook. That makes you go, wait a second, this isn't what the regular world is always going to look like. The inciting incident is the thing that propels the hero into the action of your story. The first plot point is when the hero says, okay, I'm going to do this. If you think of Star Wars, it's where Luke Skywalker says, okay, fine, I'm going to go. After his aunt and uncle get murdered. And the first pinch point, again, don't get off of these terms, is when the first sort of negative force affects the hero. The midpoint, and by the way, to show how important the midpoint is, every different flavor of book on story structure, etc., all refer to the midpoint as the midpoint. That's how important it is. If you think of the story as a seesaw, this is literally the point in the middle on which everything balances. And it shifts the context and moves the hero from reacting to things to taking an active role in things. The pinch point number 2 is, again, another antagonistic force that sets up the next motion of the hero. And then the third plot point is kind of like the beginning of the end. You can see where we're going to start wrapping up here. The climax is the conclusion of the A plot. We're going to be talking about A plot and B plot and so forth later. And resolution is where you basically tie up everything nice and neat, and here is what the world looks like now. See, keep in mind that no matter what you call them, all your plot points have a counterpoint. The hook has a resolution, the inciting incident has a climactic event. So, for example, in a movie where, like Batman, where the inciting incident is the guy who eventually becomes the Joker killing Bruce Wayne's parents, the climactic event is when Bruce, now as Batman, deals with the Joker and puts him away. Plot point number 1 goes with plot point number 3. Pinch point 1 goes with pinch point 2, and the midpoint is the hinge of the story. That's a good way to look at it. Look at it as a hinge. You might think to yourself, isn't this going to be boring? No, it's not. And you see an image that's going to come in the next slide. This is it. It's almost like engineering. You can't say, well, isn't this going to be a very dull car if it follows engineering principles? No, if it doesn't follow engineering principles, it's going to be a pile of junk in your driveway. You need to have these basic elements in the correct place and taking up the correct amount of space to make things happen. And especially those of you that are going to be working in animation and in gaming, this is going to be very crucial for you because you're going to be playing off those audience expectations. Okay? They're expecting certain things to happen a certain way. What those things are and how you shape them, how you give them texture and context is up to you. That's where the creative part is. And I'm going to give you a really terrible analogy. It's like building a house and you have the plans and you're going to say, isn't this going to be a boring house because I'm following these plans by the architect? No, because you get to decide what color the wall's going to be, what kind of doorknobs are you going to have, what kind of plumbing fixtures are you going to put in, what kind of kitchen appliances you're going to have. And you can have two houses that have very identical plans looking very, very different depending how you do the landscaping, how you put the doors and the drapes and all that kind of stuff. Don't get hung up on that as far as a hindrance to creativity. Because once you do this, what's going to happen is you're going to make the stories that you've developed much more commercially viable. If you really are coloring outside the lines, no pun intended to the animators, being able to sell your project is going to be almost impossible. But if you do it right, then you will do like our friend Ethan Banville. Those of you who are familiar with the Amazon animated series, The Oddballs, then you can sell a gigantic show to Amazon, plus all the merch, plus all the books and all the ancillaries. This is a way of making something both artistic and commercially viable. And all else being equal, being artistic and commercially viable is better than just plain artistic. So anyway, linking these plot points carries your story. It's kind of like when you go down to the Florida Keys, you don't say, what a boring place. All I saw was mile markers. No, mile markers are what take you from one place to the next and let you know that you are where you're supposed to be. Okay? These all help you highlight and emphasize the A story. The B
And he's
story
got 2
will
more
more or less take
sessions
care
that
of
are going to
itself
be on the 18th and
if you have a
25th.
good
Do you
A
think it's
story.
okay if maybe
And
we
your plot points are not going to be repeats, and they're not going to, do anything other than call back to one another. They're going to really help the sort of
I
the
think they
emotional
were.
flow
Let
of
me
a
double
particular story
check.
be
Let's
Brenda,
carried
your
through.
mic
And
is
by the
on
way,
and I can't hear.
let me be
Brenda.
absolutely clear that
Mute your mic.
the purpose
Let's
of
see what they
every
said.
every story that you have developed or will develop in those beats, what you are really doing is giving the audience something to feel at every step of the way. There's going to be a point, and you'll see this shortly, where the audience is supposed to feel disappointed, where the audience is going to feel frustrated, where the audience is supposed to feel, overconfident. That's a big one. All those things, and by knowing what you were supposed to do, where it's supposed to do it, you're going to be able to do it a lot better. Now, here is the graphic I wanted to show you. This is a kid's pegboard. And what you need to know is that in this square, it needs to be a square. Can it be blue? Look, it's blue here. Do you want to, can it be red? Yes, it can be red. It can be orange, purple, plaid. It can have stripes. Doesn't matter. Just keep in mind that it has to be square. What that square looks like, that's up to you. That's where your creativity comes in. So let's talk about the midpoint before we get any further. There are two really big things we need to talk about as we discuss this entire story structure. The two big things are the midpoint and the finale. Okay. The midpoint is the fulcrum on which the context of your story changes. Okay. This is where we go from, gee, I'm trying to figure out what's going on, to I figured out what's going on, and now I'm going to be heroic about it. And it triggers this kind of shift from external, the external shift is going to be from reaction to action. again, I've been absorbing, I'm a character. Been absorbing, I'm figuring out what's going on. Oh, I figured out what's going on. Now I'm gonna go and do the thing. So ask yourself this, does this midpoint include a major revelation that shifts the plot? Think of Luke, I am your father. Oh, wow, that shifts a plot. Does your midpoint set up a moment of truth for the characters? Does your midpoint change the protagonist's focus from reacting to acting? If something looks off, look at your plot points. That said, plot points are not giant carved in marble monoliths. Okay. If you map out your plot points, you're going to see a picture of a project I was working on that I was particularly proud of that. Can I tell my story using just these? By the way, I'll give you a very simple example, something I just sent off this weekend. I'm working on a project, and with this particular producer, before I go crazy and write out a very, a 60-something page TV pilot. And by the way, when you're writing, it's work. We're not messing around. This is, writing is work. It's not something you crank out in a weekend. There are legendary writers that would take a year to write a movie. Just be aware of that. But I sent what I'm about to show you, which we call the beat sheet, the 15 beats, 5 per act, to see if I was on the right track, to see if I could tell the story I wanted to tell about this guy at the CIA who does this and that other thing against terrorists. If you can tell that story in such a condensed form, expanding it in an accordion kind of way is going to be very easy. If you cannot, then you got to go back to your plot points and see what's missing or what's in the wrong place. And when in doubt, you can look at other great examples of storytelling, and we're going to go over one, and in the next session, we're going to go over 2, possibly 3 more, so you can see how very different movies have the same sort of bones about it. Here, by the way, one of the things that I wish I could reach over and show you, I'm a huge fan of post-it. And multiple colors and multiple sizes, it's almost a fetish. So this is the story structure that I wanted for a particular project. And different colors meant different things. And you put them like that, you can visualize where you are. And if you see that this area is cluttered with post-it notes and this one's very bare, you can tell like that where your problems are and how you need to go about fixing them. So this is what we're going to talk about today. This is what the elements are of a given beat sheet. You're going to get this in the PDF if you email for it. And you will be able to put post-it notes on all these to figure out where you need to be. And even if you, by the way, I don't want to give anybody false hope. Even if you use this and use it correctly, the first 10 things you write are going to be terrible because this takes practice. But the 10th one is going to not be terrible. It's going to be okay. And then you're going to write 10 okay things, and then it's going to be good, and so forth. It takes a lot of practice. It seems when you speak about it a lot longer than it is, but if you do this, if you give yourself half an hour every day, some people want to do it first thing in the morning, some people want to do it with a good, whatever works for you. If you give yourself half an hour every day, by this time next year, you will have a really good script. If you do this every day, and just make a little calendar, put a little X on every day that you gave yourself that half hour to write, and your goal is not to break the chain. Don't worry about whether it's good or not. It won't be good until you get to the last of the X's of the calendar. X number 365, 366 in this year. It's the leap year. But this is the story map I want you to use. You can get more complicated later, but for right now, this, by the way, is what 90% of all the writers in feature films, television shows, Disney, Pixar in particular, is fanatical about this particular structure with an Act 1, an Act 2A, an Act 2B, and an Act 3. Okay? They are fanatical, and you'll see this very, very shortly. Our example is Finding Nemo. Finding Nemo is one of the easy, by the way, all the Pixar films use a structure. If you want to do, yourself a favor and go down a rabbit hole. Go through all the Pixar films and put the story structure, sort of up against it, and you'll see it. But Finding Nemo is one of the clearest. And if you go back to the previous thing, you'll see that we'll always start with an opening image. The opening image is the first impression of what the movie is. It gives you a tone, it gives you a mood, it gives you the kind of story. Are we telling a science fiction story? Are we telling a Western, etc.? And it gives you the scope of the film or the TV episode. Is it a grand scope, or is it a very personal, intimate scope? By the way, none of those are right, none of those are wrong. They're just what the author, the writer wants it to be. The opening image of Nemo is, here is the under the seafloor with the anemones and marlin and coral, those are Nemo's parents, and their little home. Marlin's family is destroyed, and it leaves only Nemo. And that lets you also know that Marlin couldn't protect his family. So that's the opening image. It's sure, it literally is page 1 and nothing more than page 1. Parentheses, you're going to see a lot of times some page numberings. Those are suggestions. Do not be fanatical about it. Just this lets you know more or less how big a particular beat needs to be. This is a longer beat. This is a shorter beat. But don't get hung up on that. Just more or less know that you've got to be more or less in the ballpark. The theme stated, and the theme has to come very early on. Somebody, and it's almost always not the main character, will pose a question, will make a statement, will say something to the main character, and that's kind of the theme of the movie. And it's not obvious. If it's obvious, it's a lousy theme, or you're saying it in a lousy way. And it's conversation. This is not something with bright red neon flashing light. Because what you want the audience to do is, when you get to the finale, go, oh yeah, I get it. So here we see the theme of this story. Marlin saying, I'm not going to let anything happen to you. And you think, Nemo, that you can do these things, but you can't. And that's kind of where that becomes important. You get to see that this is what we're going to be, quote unquote, dealing with. Never mind the actual story, the plot. Plot is only a part of the story. Theme is another part, etc. That's what we're going to be dealing with throughout the entire movie. Then you have your setup. That's more or less your first 10 pages of the script. And this is where you get people's interest. So in the case of Nemo, you're showing them sort of the undersea world. You show them who among the characters behaves a certain way and why do they behave that way, and you're going to see where the hero needs to change. And it's where you set up kind of like the sort of the thesis statement for the film. This is the world of this movie before we go off on our adventure. We see that Marlin's overprotective and Nemo pushes for more freedom. That's the point of the setup, to show these two things. Now, in the setup, the screenwriter has told us what the world is like, and then you're going to have a catalyst. In a previous slide, we called it the inciting incident. The thing that knocks it all down, the first something that really happens in the movie. And in Nemo, it is when Nemo gets taken by the divers. That's the part when you're a little kid and you watch that, you go, uh-oh. And that sets up what happens next. The inciting incident makes it so that your characters cannot stand still. They can't just say, oh, well, they took Nemo back to the coral reef. The heroes have to figure out what they need to do and figure out if they think they're capable of doing. And this ends with okay, we're going to do X. Off we go. That's a debate. Can I do this? I don't know. I'm not sure. Okay. Oh, I guess I have to. Let me do this. And that debate is that Marlin has is, where can Marlin look for Nemo? It's a gigantic ocean out there. And how can I find Nemo? that leads us into the break into Act Two, which is more or less in a feature film, more or less page 25. It's a definitive, decisive break from the world that it was to the world that is to come. And you move from, these are fancy words, don't get excited, from thesis to antithesis, where the hero, and our hero is Marlon, has to make the decision to move into Act Two. And that's when they find an address in Australia. Now they have a goal, now they have a destination, now they know how they can find Nemo. And now we go into the B story. And B story has, most of the time, it's a love story. Not always. In Finding Nemo, it is not a love story. It also echoes the film's theme, and it gives us a break. Because if the Finding Nemo, action is all that Finding Nemo is about, you're gonna need oxygen by the time the movie's over. It gives us a break, and it lets us sort of meet new characters that inhabit that world. So if you notice this in Finding Nemo, it's when we see all the other fish in the aquarium that Nemo gets to meet. Then we come to everybody's favorite part. This should be your favorite part. Pages more or less 30 to more or less 55. It's called the promise of the premise, which is, from the audience's standpoint, is the core and the essence of the movie's poster. Why did you go see this movie? And we take a break from sort of like the important events of the movie that need to be solved, and we kind of get to see, what this is all about. The best example of this, from an explaining standpoint, is all the James Bond movies. And 9 times out of 10, people go see the James Bond movies to see the gadgets. He has a watch that turns into a buzzsaw. He has a thing that turns into a laser. The car turns into a submarine. All that stuff. That's the fun and games. In your mind's eye, you could almost see it as a montage of all the fun stuff that this particular movie promises. In Harry Potter is when he figures out how the broom works and all these potions, that kind of thing. When in Star Wars is where he gets the lightsaber and he kind of starts playing around with the force. That's that. And we see a lot of that in Nemo when Marlin and Dory go on the road looking for Nemo. And you also see when Nemo joins the crew at the tank. And that brings us to the midpoint, which is about page 55. The reason it's about page 55 is, if it's a feature, it should be about 110 pages. For those of you who are not aware, figure that each page is a minute of screen time. Yes, you can make a 3-hour movie if you're Christopher Nolan or if you're Martin Scorsese, but most people who are going to be creatives really should think of, it's kind of self-indulgent to say that my audience has nothing better to do for 3 hours than to watch what I want to show them. So start at 110. Once you've won a couple of Oscars, I give you permission to go to 300 pages. See if I can. But until then, try to stick more or less to 110, because that'll give you just under a couple hours. Okay, in the midpoint, you're going to have either an up where the hero seemingly peaks, although it's a false peak, or where everything falls apart, although it's a false falling apart. We call those false victories and false defeats. And that's important. And now things get really important in the mid. It used to be about solving this thing, and now, it used to be about finding the people who killed Luke Skywalker's aunt and uncle. Now it becomes a point of, we have to blow up the Death Star. Okay. This midpoint beat has a matching beat on page ballpark 75, which is all is lost. By the way, that it is what it says on the can. All is lost. And these two kind of are paired because it's never so good at the midpoint, and it's never as bad at the all is lost. And a great movie that has a great false victory. Most of the time, it's a false defeat. One of the best false victories is Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. That movie where you think, and you are really fooled into thinking that this movie is about Harry Potter winning the Goblet of Fire. And you think, A, this is what it's about, and B, he's gonna do this. Wow. He's a little kid, and he's competing against all these other grown, larger, older, more experienced, wizard students. And then you get a reversal. So you get a very false victory when he's at the last stage and he's gonna win. And then it turns out he does. Anyway, so it's never as good as it seems at the midpoint, and it's never as bad as it seems at the all is lost point. For example, here Marlin and Dory are with the turtles. They found the current, and everything is fine. And then Nemo stops the filter. He's going to escape with the other fish. Now, here's one of the hardest beats: is the bad guys close in. You, as the audience member, can tell that this is going to get bad. It isn't bad yet, but you see it coming. And this is really the most difficult part of your screenplay, where everything seems fine and the bad guys sort of seem set back, but they're not. If you remember Raiders of the Lost Ark, one of these examples, it's not a perfect example, but it gets the idea, is where the bad Nazi guy tries to grab the staff that had been caught in the fire, and he burns his hand, and you think, ha ha, you got what you deserve. That'll teach him. And then all of a sudden, in another scene, you see him open his hand and he's got the engravings burned on his palm. Oops. Uh-oh. So that's that they're not done yet. And now you're going to start to see internal dissent, doubt, jealousy, negative emotions, internal conflict, etc., begin to deteriorate the hero's team. In Harry Potter, one of the 7th or the 8th one, one of the last two ones, where you get Ron Weasley gets into a fight with Hermione, and they split up. That's what we're talking about here. That dissent threatens the entire team. And you need the team. There's a hero to the team, Harry Potter, but the hero cannot do this without his team. So now forces are aligned against, for example, Harry Potter, both external, Voldemort, and internal. His team is falling apart, and the situation is getting worse. In Nemo, it's when they get swallowed by the whale, and when the tank is clean, and the little girl comes to get Nemo. And here we go to all is lost. It's about page 75, and it's the opposite of the midpoint, in terms of an up or a down. It's also what is called the false defeat, and it's always, I want to say, like 3/4 of the time, it's a false defeat. Okay, everything looks terrible, but it's just temporary. But it has to look not temporary. It has to look like a real, final, absolute defeat. Every aspect that the hero has counted on has to be in shambles. There has to be no hope. By the way, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, it's called a false victory. But it's usually a false defeat. For our purposes, let's stick to false defeat for now. And it has to sometimes have the whiff of death, like, okay, somebody important is going to die. For example, in Finding Nemo, Marlin thinks that Nemo is dead, which for Marlin is all he'd ever lived for, is to sort of rescue what was left of his family, meaning Nemo. And if that's gone, what's he got? He's got nothing. It's, the end of the line for Marlin. And all is lost leads to the dark night of the soul. A really good example from a really terrible movie is a movie called Joe versus the Volcano. And there is a scene where he has shipwrecked and he's made a raft out of Louis Vuitton steamer trunks. And it's where he kind of like looks up at the night sky and talks to God. That's a very clear example, not a great example, but it's a clear example of what we're talking about. This is the darkest, lowest, terriblest point for that particular character, right before things get better. Only they don't know it's going to get better. And something prompts our hero to, like, just, as I say, dig deep, go really deep inside and like pull out this last best something to save the day. But before they do that, the heroes must be beaten, and they must know they have been beaten. They must know they have been beaten. If you remember the last of the Harry Potter films, it's when he decides to voluntarily go get killed by Voldemort. You know, I've lost. Yeah, I'm going to take my medicine like a big boy. And in this case, for example, is when Marlin and Dory sort of go their separate ways, and Nemo decides to go into the garbage can at the dentist's office. The break into Act 3. Now things are going to turn around. The answer is found. It's about page 85. Both the external A story and the internal B story now sort of meet and get tangled up. The hero has figured out what he needs to do, has passed every test and prevailed. Now what we need to do is have the hero execute what he's learned. A great example is the original Star Wars, where everything has failed for Luke, and he hears Obi-Wan's voice, "Use the Force, Luke." And he decides to, okay, I'm going to use the Force. And he starts flying right, and now he's going to go and blow up the Death Star. By the way, sometimes it gets very fancy. They use the world of the synthesis, where the antithesis and the thesis come together. Don't get excited about it. It's not that deep. You know, Nemo finds Marlin with Dory's help. And here comes the finale, page 85. By the way, we're going to cover the finale a little bit later because it's such an, like the midpoint was important, the finale is very important. A movie that doesn't have a good finale, no matter what else has happened in the movie, is a terrible movie. For those of you who have subjected yourselves to James Cameron's The Abyss, you know what I'm talking about. It fell apart in the finale, and therefore nobody watches it anymore, even though the first 3 quarters were brilliant. Steven Spielberg's Empire of the Sun is another movie that fell apart in the finale. Anyway, this is where we start wrapping things up, where the lessons that the characters, especially the main character, has learned are applied, where the A story and the B story end in triumph. For example, Harry Potter, he kills Voldemort, and Ron and Hermione sort of realize that they're in love with each other and they're going to live happily ever after. It's the end of the old world and the start of a new world, thanks to the hero who led the way based on the experiences that he learned in the very traumatic Act 2. This is a crucial point. The chief source of the problem, not necessarily a character, although it can be, doesn't have to be, has to be dealt with completely. We're done with this source of problem. In a sequel, we can do something else, but for our purposes, for this feature, we have to deal with this completely here. And that leads us to, you see Dory stuck in the net, Nemo can save her, Marlin has to decide whether to let Nemo. Marlin finally decides to let Nemo, and Nemo saves the day. Marlin learned and changed. We're going to discuss this a lot better when we talk about storytelling in the next session. That's going to be important, but it's important that your main character transforms. This is a spoiler alert for next time. Main characters do one of 3 things. They transform and save the day. They don't transform, but everybody else transforms around them because this character was always right all along. That's pretty rare, but it happens. Or third, the main character does not transform, and those are always tragedies. Not just a drama, but like a Shakespearean tragedy. Your Hamlets, your Macbeths, etc. The main character needed to change, did not change, and now everything fell apart. And now we're left with the final image. The final image is in a movie is the opposite of the opening image. And it's proof, it's a certificate to the audience that things are now different. They have changed, and they've changed permanently. And in Nemo, we see them very clearly. where you see Marlin and Nemo, and you see that Marlin lets Nemo go to school. Marlin sends Nemo off to explore, and that relationship is mended. Okay, here is the finale. And by the way, again, don't get excited. You're going to get this for you to play with on your own. Let's use Star Wars as an example. Part one of the finale, step one, is to gather the team, because the team has to storm the castle to free the princess. But page 85, more or less, the hero decides he needs to go beat the bad guy. And the mentor, the old sage, the Gandalf, the Obi-Wan, the Dumbledore, gives the main character a certain bit of wisdom that the hero didn't have at the time, and that serves as guidance. Quick sip, sorry. And with that, in the case of Star Wars, Luke and the rebels head off to the Death Star looking for a weak. Step two is when we storm the castle, and we enter sort of like the bad guys' home turf. The plan begins. The castle is, we breach the castle walls. The hero comes in, and everything's going great. The hero or heroine, we don't discriminate, gets to where she or he needs to go. And that's when all the rebels, in Star Wars, this big sort of squadron, flight wing of X-Wing fighters descends upon the Death Star. Step three is what they call the high tower surprise. It's a trap. You get to where you need to go, but the princess isn't there. It's a trap, and the bad guys look like we're going to win. Who let the bad? What's going on? This is not supposed to happen. In Star Wars, is where the rebels miss, and they're either shot down, they die, or they fly off in fear. And where Darth Vader starts chasing Luke. And here's the dig deep, which we discussed before. The hero needs a new plan. And this is the moment at which the hero lets himself be transformed. Right now, they've been kind of, maybe I will, maybe I won't be transformed. They may be trying to get transformation on the cheap, whatever. Now the hero has no choice but to transform if he wants to win. And he's about to quit, but he gives it one last shot. And this is when Luke decides to use the Force. And if you remember that scene, he has that glass thing on his eye to help him navigate. He lets go of that. He just goes strictly by the Force. And not only is he's no longer resisting the Force, he's now relying on it, which is a very big transformation. And the last execution the last step is the execution of the plan, the final battle, where he actually uses the Force. He took off his IFA, uses the Force, and he blows up the Death Star. Hooray for him. This is something that 5 minutes earlier he would have never imagined in that film. Okay. Two more examples that we're going to go over next week, very briefly, are How the Grinch Stole Christmas, because it's both animated and television, which has, obviously it's shorter, whether 30-minute or 1 hour, it's shorter than a feature film. So the beats come in different places and they're a little bit more fluid because of the time constraints, and also in many cases of commercial breaks. And also we're going to go over The Matrix because it's a very obvious use of this story structure. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat, and I'm going to see what if anybody's got any questions. Okay. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat now. Let me unshare the screen so that we can stop sharing the screen. And by the way, one of the things I want to give you guys a little bit of a kudos. These things that we do almost always have 1 million people registered. Almost always, it's only a very few that actually, make the time to show up to do this. Okay, to Alfredo, This is all story structure. This all applies to gaming. This is not technical gaming, animation, programming stuff. This is how you build the story that goes into your game. So this applies to whether it's animated film, live action film, even documentaries. Everything that you do in the screen arts, from documentary to gaming, from sketches to film franchises to miniseries, all these have a structure, and you have to learn the structure regardless of what you're using it for, regardless of whether it's going to be a gaming, if it's going to be an animated film, it's going to be a 30-minute TV comedy. Everything has to have the same structure. And it's important. If you design a game and the game's storyline is not healthy, you're going to have a terrible game. Even with the greatest effects and the most realistic whatever, it's just not going to work. So let's see, Eric, the way you would do this is twofold in a TV series. In a TV series, you have a story structure that covers that episode. The pilot, let's say. We start with the pilot, and you're introduced to all these characters that nobody's ever been introduced before. And the only real difference is that your finale is not the end of the story, hey, we're done. Your finale is going to lead you to the opening image of the next episode. And you have to do a beat sheet that covers the entire series. Let's say, for the sake of discussion, we're talking about a broadcast series of 22 episodes. You need to have the same you have to sort of expand the beat sheet to cover, think of it, this is a terrible analogy, think of it as a 22-hour episode. So you need to put your midpoint, and as you're putting a small midpoint within an episode, you also have a larger midpoint kind of over here on top that covers the entire series. Maybe if it's like one of these procedurals where, oh, it's the fire chief that dies in episode 9. So keep all that in mind. All right, now, how is AI going to affect all this? If I knew that, I'd have a beach house right now. But AI right now is still very much in its infancy. If you ever try to if you're not a good writer, or scratch that, Your Honor, if you're not a very practiced writer, and you go to one of these AI sites to try to generate a script, they're invariably terrible. And if you're a very practiced writer, and I tried this once, you have to give it prompts all the time because it just starts veering off in a different direction because it has not absorbed enough knowledge to sort of mash it up and regurgitate it in a way that is satisfactory to what you're trying to do. What AI will do, if you use it correctly, is it'll make the actual typing, not the writing, the typing easier. And it's almost as if you were going to make a remake of a given movie, and you got the original script and said, this is a bit 1940s. I need to fix that. You're basically playing with the margins. And even if we do get to a point where AI can, quote unquote, write original material, set aside the fact that it's using copyrighted material to do this, let's set that aside for now, you're going to have to know where it's going off the rails. So you need to be aware of story structure, you need to be aware of character development, you need to be aware of all these things so that you can see where it's going off the rails and you can fix it, or prompt it to be fixed on its own, assuming you can do that at that point. I've got a couple more minutes. Does anybody have any additional questions? Okay. No, thank you, Dan. That's very kind of you. Yes, Alfredo, I think that's exactly right. I think that is exactly right. And the difference between gaming and sort of what we're going to call more passive storytelling is gaming has to take into account the inputs of the player. And being able to arrange elements of that game so that when a character does something, and by the way, the really easy way to practice this, back in the 80s, they used to have this thing called interactive fiction before we had any meaningful graphics development, where you literally, you turn on the game and a prompt would show up and said, it's dark and you're in your bedroom. And you would type, I get up and brush my teeth. And the game would say, oh, you tripped over your cat, gave yourself a concussion. And you have to figure, okay, let me sit up in bed. Okay, you sit up in bed, you look around, etc. If you go online and you Google Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy game, it'll give you a very good baseline for the narrative part of this, just to figure out how to account for the user, the player, in the way you assemble your story structure. And it's not that much more different. It's just that, okay, there's one extra variable you need to take into account. So I'm going to put my email address in the chat. If you would like a copy of this PDF, or if you'd like for us to send you the link once we put it up on YouTube, please send an email to right. Well, guys, it's been sensational. If you had half as much fun as I did, you had a great time. It's been terrific, and I look forward to seeing you. If you have any questions, hold them to, you can email them, but let's hold off on answering them, at the next session, because I'm sure that other people might have had the same question as well. Again, thanks for everything. We look forward to seeing you in 1 week's time. Thanks. Bye-bye.